Hi there, my little sunshine. Here's the deal. The Middle Ages didn't end with a sunrise and a trumpet. They ended at night, to the sound of bells that wouldn't stop. Doors chalked, streets salted, carts creaking toward pits. A mother ties a charm at her child's wrist. A clerk writes 3 names, crosses out 2. And somewhere on a pier, a sailor coughs into his sleeve and swears it's just the wind. That's where we begin. In this episode, we're not chasing monsters in plague masks. We're following the paperwork, the wages, the silences. We'll watch one harbour infect a continent and see how a supply chain, not a superstition, carried the worst news Europe ever received. We'll price a human life by the day's wage and learn why empty chairs in workshops shattered centuries-old bargains. We'll see borders invented from ropes and ink, quarantines, health passes, guards who count bodies instead of stories. We'll watch medicine break in public, astrologers, relics, bloodletting, and watch trust break faster as cities choose scapegoats when knowledge runs out. We'll count the dead because authorities had to, and the living because markets had to. And we'll end in the art shop, where death turns into business. Memory sold by the panel, grief measured by the yard. If you think the Black Death was only about death, stay to the end. It also rewired work, government, belief, and the way we imagine tomorrow. That's how the plague really destroyed the Middle Ages. Before we dive in, hit like, subscribe for more deep dives, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. Let's see where this story travels tonight. Chapter 1. The night the bells wouldn't stop. The first thing you notice is the sound. Not screaming, not prayers. Bells. Too many, too near, too late. The city tries to sleep. The bells tell it not to. They call the living to church, and, in the same breath, they announce the dead. Between strokes, shutters scrape open and close like cautious eyelids. A dog barks at a cart that passes without a lantern, the driver murmuring a name as if it were a password. The moon is the only clerk who can see every street at once, and even it looks away when the carts turn down toward the pits. In one narrow lane, a woman chalks a cross on the lintel. She does not know if it protects the house or only marks it. Inside, her husband lies between 2 blankets in mid-July. The heat of him is winter. A neighbour leans in with a cloth tied at the mouth and nose. He's not sure whether this keeps vapours out or courage in. The bell at the parish starts again, slower now, as if the rope were heavier. A sacristan counts with his fingers and miscounts. The numbers have stopped making sense. It is a night of mistakes that make their own truths. The city's orders are simple because they are frightened. No wakes in private homes. No gatherings beyond 12. No bodies kept past sunset. Laws written in daylight stumble in the dark. The beadles, who yesterday chased market thieves, now knock with gloved knuckles and ask after coughs. On one corner, an unpaid watchman sells a rumour for a coin. The disease is in the air. It is in the wells. It is in the foreign cloth. It is in the sin you didn't confess properly. He will say anything that buys him a better mask. A friar with a book of hours passes and does not argue. He has learned that argument is a wind that carries everything. Across town, a guildmaster refuses to ring the infirmary bell. He has lost 2 apprentices in 3 days and will not let the 3rd become a signal. He orders his wife to boil vinegar and wash the floor. He orders the remaining boy to keep the workshop furnace lit. The glass must be annealed by dawn or shatter. Even in a plague, there is chemistry that will not wait. The boy coughs once and pretends he dropped a shard. The furnace glows like a tiny defiance. Under the old wall, the gravediggers argue quietly about the width of the trench. One says it must be narrower so the sides don't fall in. One says it must be wider so the cart can tip without catching. They measure with their bodies and choose the argument that spares their backs. They have learned to keep the rope soaking in brine. It burns their hands less, and the knots come loose when it matters. They do not speak of the priest who used to come down to bless each layer. Tonight he sent a cloth dipped in holy water and the promise of a mass tomorrow. Tomorrow has too much work assigned to it. In the still room of a merchant's house, a jar labelled with a red thread sits next to a jar labelled with a black. The red is for fever, the black is for fear. The merchant's daughter learned that from a hired apothecary who talked more than he measured. She was charmed by the certainty of his face, not the contents of his jars. Now she is the only one in the house who will open either. She dips a spoon into the red and lifts it to her brother's lips. It tastes like wine that remembered an orchard. He sleeps. She takes the black for herself because she is 18 and cannot be seen to tremble. At the Watergate, the harbour is dark except for the faint glow where sailors' dice under a sail hung like a wall. The men have been told to stay aboard until morning inspection. They laugh, cough, spit through the slats to mark the tide. They have seen cities pretend to be stronger than the price of pepper. They have seen quarantine ropes cut by hands desperate for work. They will see, by dawn, whether this city is like the others. One of them scratches at a welt in his armpit and jokes that the fleas here bite through leather. Another throws him a coin, say a prayer with it. He palms the coin and says none. Back in the lane with the chalked cross, a midwife arrives at the wrong hour for the wrong task. She has been called to help the dying because her hands are sure. She knows when to lift and when to press, when to heat and when to cool. She whispers to the woman that she will sit until the end and sit after it. They have done this for births and fevers and winters without bread. The midwife will, if asked, shave the hair around the swellings and paint them with onion and oil. She will, if asked, tell no one that she saw them. Discretion is a second medicine. What spreads faster than the sickness is the practice of hiding it. A shopkeeper who yesterday greeted every passerby now flips his sign to closed for inventory and counts nothing. A baker puts loaves on a table outside and ties a cord from the threshold to the leg, pulling it taut so no one comes closer than the length of a loaf. A constable assigned to patrol the bridge stands at one end and watches the other, content to be a problem of distance rather than breadth. The bridge itself keeps score. Fewer footsteps, heavier wheels. In a house with a good address, a notary unrolls a fresh sheet and writes the year in a hand that has learned to look unshaken. He lists bequests that sound like a map of the city, to the altar of Saint Sebastian, to the hospital of the poor, to the guild of tailors, to my daughter, to my posthumous child. He leaves money to the bell ringers because the bells must be paid to tell the truth. When the notary pauses to sand the ink, the client asks whether naming a saint twice doubles the protection. The notary says yes. It costs him nothing to let hope do what medicine cannot. Along the ramparts, boys who would be squires are told to leave the practice yard. The Baron has forbidden the handling of shared equipment. They look at their wooden swords as if the disease could hide in the splinters. One boy disobeys and swings until his arms tire. He is determined to be strong against a foe he cannot see. His tutor watches and does not correct the form. In a season of obedient fear, disobedient bravery is its own cure for the soul, if not the body. The moon slides behind cloud, and the yard becomes an idea rather than a place. A widow who cleans the cathedral hears the bells from inside the stone and thinks of the first time she held the rope alone. She had not yet learned to lean her weight into the pull. Now she could ring a siege into being. The dean of the chapter has given permission to remove the holy water from the fonts. She pours it into a large basin and watches men line up with cups, careful not to touch the lip. Theology has acquired hygiene by accident. She does not laugh, but she wants to. On the river, a barge slides without voice. The rowers have wrapped cloth around the oar handles and around their palms. They have heard that wood remembers touch. They have heard that the breath of a stranger can spoil a boat for a week. They have heard that sailors brought it, that merchants paid for it, that God allowed it because the city forgot humility. They have heard everything but a reason that helps them sleep. The foreman promises a double wage if they finish before dawn. All graces now are counted in coins. What keeps the city awake is not only fear, but arithmetic. The almshouse had 12 beds. Today it needed 30. The feudalists, who administer the fund to dower poor girls, have a meeting set for market day. There may be no market and no girls left unmarried. The candle maker calculates whether tallow will outlast funerals. A shepherd who left his flock at the south gate is told he cannot return to the hills until 3 days pass. He argues that his sheep will not respect a rope. The guard says the rope is not for sheep. They both shrug like men who obey rules that grow from the ground, not from minds. The city writes lists because lists look like control. The rector's clerk writes the names of the dead on a page and tears off the bottom when it fills. He will paste it into the ledger tomorrow with paste that used to mend psalters. The city council orders a house for those with swellings to be set apart by the river. They choose a warehouse that once smelled of oranges and will now smell of vinegar and fear. A mason chalks a line where a new door will go. He sets his chisel and thinks about his eldest, who asked tonight whether the angels ring the bells or only listen. By the hour before dawn, something like order presents itself. The carts have made 2 trips each. The watch has learned where to stand to look brave without catching breath. The priests have chosen the shortest readings. The apothecary has watered his strongest tincture until its price fits more mouths. The guildmaster has sat down and finally rung his own bell, because you cannot bury in silence even if you live by glass. The bells answer him from every direction, slow and uneven, like a conversation among tired men. There is a moment, a small, embarrassing moment, when the city decides to pretend it can continue. A fishmonger puts a single lamp in his stall and arranges 3 trout as if arranging 30. A tailor hangs a new doublet in his doorway with a paper tag that says, "For a wedding," as if weddings were not a superstition now. A schoolmaster opens his door and scratches a sum on the slate. He will teach whatever boys arrive how to divide 6 loaves among 4 households. He will tell them to show their work. And then, just as the eastern rooftops think about changing colour, the harbour answers the city's question. Ropes creak, not as nooses but as moorings. A bell on a mast rings with the wind, a prettier sound than the ones ashore, and worse. The quarantine boat slides out with a city seal flapping from its stern. Men aboard wear sashes of office over shirts that have not seen sleep. They will circle the new arrivals and shout questions about ports, crew, cargo. The answers will be honest enough to be dangerous. A boy who has not slept runs to the pier because ships are stories. He counts the hulls, 1, 2, 3, and the small one that tries to hide between them. He waves before he remembers not to. On the nearest deck, a sailor lifts a hand and coughs into the crook of his arm, like a man trained by too many warnings. Another sailor tips a bucket over the side. What spills is only water, but the boy steps back anyway, as if the splash were a message that learned how to fly. The bells on land keep ringing, now muffled by distance, now sharpened by alleyways. They do not know whether to greet dawn as a reprieve or a witness. The city's ledgers will say, later, that the worst began with a week of heat. The sermons will say it began with pride. The poems will say it began with a smell like metal and roses. But if you were in the streets that night, you would say it began when the bells would not stop, and ended when the harbour woke. We will walk down the timbers in the morning light and see how a harbour teaches a continent to fall ill. Cargo touched by hands that touched other hands, contracts that outlived consciences, prices that whittled ropes thin. The ships are not metaphors, they are machines, and they are already here. Chapter 2. Plague ships at dawn. How one harbour infected a continent. Dawn unwraps the harbour like a parcel no one wants to claim. The quarantine boat has done its slow circle. The officials return with ink on their cuffs and a colder set of faces. Paperwork is comfort, but it cannot hold a rope. On the quay, porters squat with their hooks, pretending to discuss wages while they count the blisters on the sailors' lips, the way men cough and look away as if ashamed of breath. Someone says the word pestilence, and someone else laughs too loudly, because laughter is a fence you can build fast. The first ship answers questions in the grammar of trade. Port of origin, list of stops, number of souls aboard, bill of lading. Pepper, nutmeg, silk bales sealed with a merchant's private mark, sacks of grain for ballast and profit both. The master says 2 men died at sea. Heat stroke, he swears. The sea is a butcher with many knives. He produces a testimonial from the last port, a paper with a wax seal that claims the ship is clean. Everyone stares at the seal as if wax could swear on a relic. The city clerk notes the deaths anyway, and in the margin draws a small symbol he uses when a fact is honest but unhelpful. Ropes thump over bollards. The gangplank scratches wood. It takes only this, a board laid from there to here. Rats do not need ceremony. Fleas need less. They ride in the nap of a rope, the fray of a sail, the hem of a man's sleeve. You can post a guard at the plank, weigh the crew, count the cargo. You cannot arrest a vector that does not know it is one. The city will learn this by evening and forget it by the next ship, because forgetting is the only way to keep the port alive. Markets are made of disobediences that look like efficiency. An importer reaches the pier before the sun hits his stall. He has friends on this ship, and credit that wakes earlier than law. He has a warehouse half empty since last month's convoy never came, and apprentices who've started to ask whether there will be meat in the stew this week. He pays the harbour dues with the speed of a man covering a candle in the wind. A porter, seeing the coins, stops seeing the cough. The bags of grain go first, because grain is always first. Into the sling, onto the cart. Wheels scrabbling up the ramp toward the city gate that says, "No new goods without inspection." The gatekeeper inspects the bribe. It looks like 2 silver coins and a promise to send a side of bacon at Michaelmas. He nods. He has a family and a private plan to buy a better amulet. On deck, a boy with pitch on his fingers rubs his armpit and winces. He jokes again about the fleas, but this time no one throws him a coin. Below, in the dark that remembers many voyages, the bilge hums with things that do not belong to men. Rope ends, seed pods, wet straw, eyes that catch light like beads. The boy kicks a barrel to hear the slosh and keep his courage. The sound returns dull. The barrel is heavy and the day is long. The second ship, smaller, local, with a master who owes money to the first, lies and says he touched only clean ports. He is a poor liar. The officials do the arithmetic of routes and find contradictions. The master shrugs and says the sea was rough and the charts hard to read. He produces a saint's medal. The officials do not write saints in ledgers, but they do not throw medals into the water either. They tie a yellow cord across his gangplank and announce a hold. The crew sit on barrels and pretend to be resigned. A boy slips under the cord with a grin and a basket. The grin says he belongs to the city more than to the ship. The basket says there are people ashore who buy fresh fish at any hour. Crown or cordon be damned. Watch the path of one bale of cloth. It leaves the deck on a shoulder that has carried grain and infants and coffins without complaint. It crosses the plank, passes a man with a feather in his hat who pinches it to feel the weave, descends to the quay where two boys fight to claim the rope, is heaved onto a cart whose wheels wobble when it turns left. It takes a lane shaded by overhanging upper stories, brushes a tavern door that has been open since last night, pauses while the carter pisses against a wall with a chalk cross. A cat jumps onto the bale, rides to the next corner, leaps off when it hears a butcher knock 3 times on his block. At the warehouse, the bale meets other bales, cousins from other ships, and settles into a corner by a window with a view of the river. The clerk will later write, "Arrived in good order." He will be right, and disastrously so. Meanwhile, the men in sashes argue about rules that did not exist yesterday. How long shall a ship wait off the mole? How many men may leave a deck at once? Which deaths count for the value of a cargo? Those at sea, those ashore, within a day of docking, or only those with visible signs? They invent a vocabulary of caution and loophole at the same speed. A guard suggests they burn the straw from the holds. A merchant counters with the price of straw and the stables that need it. The guard is not paid to argue economics. The merchant is not paid to lift a pitchfork. The straw walks away on 3 carts to 3 stables and becomes 3 sets of bedding before noon. In one of those stables, a boy sleeps after cleaning tack, his face pressed into what used to be a hold's warm floor. The harbour has its own theology. The tide is absolution twice a day. If a thing cannot be fixed, the water will carry it away. Men believe this because believing anything else would make them put down hooks and take up prayers that don't pay. So the harbour works. The crew unload, the chandlers load. Coopers roll casks like prayers on their sides. A woman who sells cups of thin wine to stevedores watches their hands shake and sells a second cup to steady them. She wipes her cups with vinegar because she heard a physician say the word and likes its bite. The physician himself arrives late, sniffing as if diagnosis were a scent. He prescribes saffron for wages and quarantine for men he cannot afford to detain. He cannot prescribe silence, though he tries. Consider the rumour channel. Faster than any convoy, truer than any ordnance, more crooked than either. The ship from the east came dirty. The master bribed the clerk. The clerk asked for it. It's in the grain. It's in the cloth. It's in the foreigners. It's in the well by the goldsmith's lane. Each version has an enemy you can point at without a mirror. The city needs that. Fear without a target leaks into corners and soaks the floor. Fear with a target can be swept into the street and beaten with sticks. The officials fear the day the sticks turn toward the docks, because docks are more valuable than culprits. By noon, the first cart from the first ship has reached a monastery that keeps a good kitchen. The lay brother who signs for the delivery makes a joke about feeding the poor with foreign bread. The carter replies that all bread becomes local once chewed. In the infirmary, a monk changing linen over a feverish man's body pauses to bless the driver out of habit. The driver bows and feels noble. He will tell his wife that he did a holy delivery today. He will not mention the cough that started on the hill by the almond trees, because it will be gone by supper. It will not. Elsewhere, a city councillor takes the long way to the docks to see how bad things look, without admitting to himself That is why he walks. He notes with professional sadness that bad things look busy, and busy looks good in minutes. He tells the harbour master to slow the intake without stopping it, to do it skillfully so no one notices until the problem has passed or becomes someone else's. The harbour master, who has never had the luxury of skillful slowness, nods and thinks about which foreman will take offence least expensively. He picks wrong twice and spends the afternoon putting out arguments that start with rope and end with pride. There is a brief triumph, misplaced, contagious, when the third ship is turned away. The men in sashes find their courage as ink dries. The crew curses in 2 languages. The crowd on the quay cheers as if a siege tower had been pushed back from city walls. A baker throws a crust into the water, a superstition she learned from her mother. Feed the river, and it will feed you. The river eats everything. The third ship slides out, offended and lighter. It will try another port. The world is full of them. Watch now the speed at which a harbour teaches a continent to share. The men who unloaded the first ship will drink this evening in a tavern whose benches were made with nails bought by a merchant whose wife buys lace from a widow, whose son sharpens knives for the man who slaughters pigs behind the market, whose blood runs to the river that carries grain dust to the mill, that sacks flour for the bakery, that feeds the watch, who stands at the gate where the carter pays a coin to pass with the straw that lines the bed where the boy sleeps, who scratched his armpit and joked about fleas at dawn. Draw the circle wider. It will not grow weaker. Toward sunset, a cough echoes too clearly in the warehouse by the river. The clerk looks up from his ledger, annoyed at the interruption in the rhythm of numbers that make the world feel tallied. He sees the porter sitting on a bale, rosy with effort and wine, and thinks nothing of it until the man slumps in a way that is not a nap. The clerk calls for water. The water arrives as a bucket and as a woman carrying it. She says the man needs air. The clerk opens the window. The river breathes in. The city breathes out. The bells, which had rested all afternoon like old men in shade, clear their throats. By dark, the cords on the second ship's gangplank have loosened into permission. The small basket boy has already made 4 trips. His last load is a pouch with a saint's medal and a handful of dried figs for his mother. He thinks the medal will work better ashore. He is right. All medals work better where you can feel watched. He passes the midwife from the lane with the chalked cross. She is carrying a vial of vinegar and a face that has learned not to flinch. She asks him whether the ships came clean. He says the paper said so. She nods as if he had recited a creed. By midnight, the harbour sleeps the way guilty men sleep, with one eye on the door. The tide turns. The ropes creak like knees. The rats continue their work without malice, the fleas without thought, the men without enough fear to stop. Tomorrow, the first fevers in the fish market will be weather, the second bad wine, the third something going around. By the time anyone says the word aloud in public, the harbour's lesson will be inside the city's walls and looking for work. If you want to know how a continent sickens, don't start with profits. Start with invoices. Start with hands that have to eat. Start with a plank between ship and shore. Then walk that plank with me, because the next step takes us off the docks and into the price of a life. Chapter 3. The Great Unfastening. Work, wages, and the price of a life. The first market day after the bells change their tempo, the square looks right until you try to buy anything. Stalls stand where they always stood, but hands are missing. The woman who sold onions has left a cousin in her place who doesn't know the weight by touch. The fishmonger has 2 boys and a prayer. The cobbler's bench holds tools like a shrine to someone who might walk back through the door. Prices begin to float, not like bubbles, cheerful and brief, but like driftwood after a wreck. Whatever is still on the surface commands whatever you'll pay not to drown. The arithmetic is unromantic. A town loses a third of its people, sometimes half, sometimes more. The dead do not eat, the living must be fed, but the living are suddenly scarce, which means their time is suddenly dear. You can feel the old contracts loosen like knots soaked too long. A reeve repeats the word custom, the way a magician repeats a charm. A ploughman wipes his hands on his hose and says, the new custom is that he chooses where to work tomorrow. On a manor 2 miles out, a lord steward assembles the tenants and reads out the services owed. How many days with the lord's plough? How many cartloads of wood? How many hens at Martinmas? How many turns standing watch when the beacon is lit? The list sounds like yesterday, which is the point. But in the row of faces, a man coughs. Another counts his children. A third glances toward the road. The steward offers a penny to sweeten the day's service. A voice from the back, someone's younger brother who used to be quiet, asks for 3. The steward calls it insolence. The brother calls it winter money. He does not say which winter. After a plague, every season is colder than the last. The city mirrors the countryside with different tools. Guildmasters bring their journeymen into halls that smell of beeswax and old promises. They remind them of the oath sworn: good work, fair wage, obedience to the warden's rule. But 3 apprentices have disappeared into wages elsewhere. 2 have died. 1 sits in the infirmary and won't stop shivering. The bench that holds 6 now holds 3 and a ghost. A master who lost a son last month cannot finish his commissions with the men he has, yet he cannot afford to lose the contracts that feed the shop. A journeyman suggests peace rates just until this passes. The master refuses. Piecework makes every man his own guild. The journeyman nods and walks out into a street where 3 other masters are already willing to try an arrangement. Rules are solid until they are hollow. Somewhere a clerk writes a phrase that will become law. Wages shall be as they were in the 20th year of our Lord the King, or in the year before pestilence, or by the custom of the place. It is a kind of desperate time travel. Fix the price of a day as if time itself could be taxed. There are proclamations in the square, fines for masters who pay too much and for men who demand it. The words look stern in ink, but a field ignores proclamations. Barley leaf has never read a statute. The harvest decides the tone of negotiations, not the chancery. Walk a lane at dusk and you will overhear the new negotiations. A shepherd offered 2 loaves on top of coin. A thatcher told he can keep every 3rd sheaf from the roof he repairs. A washerwoman promised meat on Sundays and the right to bring her daughter to learn. Women's hands multiply in public because the plague curled so many fingers shut. Markets begin to accept who shows up, not who is permitted. A widow takes the key to her husband's stall and is polite to the warden who pretends to remember a bylaw against it. She hires a boy to lift sacks and a girl to keep figures. At the end of the week, her profit is small, but hers. Possession is 9 points of courage. In villages, the reeve staff finds itself lighter, the men bound to work the domain. Those obliged by tenure to give days instead of coin are gone or bargaining like freemen. Commute the service, they say. Set a rent and leave me my days. A lord who loved the old order more than his ledgers refuses. Another, with better arithmetic, calculates the upkeep of oxen, the cost of hiring day labourers, the uncertainty of raising a crop on sorrow, and decides to take coin and sleep. Rents begin to replace duties like words replacing gestures. Easier to write down, easier to transfer, easier to argue in court. 100 small choices like this tilt the realm. There is movement, physical, stubborn, human movement. Boys who are always going to be their fathers walk past the hedges and don't come back. A mason hears of a bridge downriver that needs hands. He leaves at dawn with his tools wrapped in cloth and a charm stitched by a sister who pretends not to be proud. A band of reapers goes town to town, swapping sharp edges for sharper terms. The old fear of being born and buried within the same parish weakens when the graveyard is full. You can only be trapped in a place while there are places to stand. Where some see opportunity, others see offence. A knight whose rent roll shrank faster than his temper rides out to complain that men behave like merchants. He uses the word insolent, again because it tastes old and strong. When he dismounts to speak to the carter who refuses a third trip without an extra groat, he notices how odd the world has become. He must persuade someone below him on the ladder. He offers patronage, protection, a letter of introduction at court. The carter asks whether any of those feed his children this week. The knight laughs and counts out the money. The laugh is part of his armor. The coins are the part that works. Apprenticeships fray. To bind a boy to a master for 7 years makes sense when boys are abundant and masters can afford to teach. When both are scarce, bargains get creative. A father who lost 2 sons offers his last to a goldsmith, not for 7 years but for 5, and only if the boy can send coin home by the winter. The goldsmith hesitates, then writes a contract that pretends to be normal and is not. He will teach less art, more speed. He will teach the boy to satisfy customers before satisfying tradition. A decade later, a customer will admire the polish of a chalice that looks like it should weigh more. The boy, now a man, will say softly that beauty and time no longer travel together. There is fraud, of course. There is always fraud when rules lag behind need. A miller pads the toll. A mason underfills a wall he built by the ell. A clerk adds a name to a list of the dead because the man is missing and his land attractive. A priest pushes a second fee across a table and calls it for the chapel's candles, with a face that doesn't blush. But if you look closer, fraud is also a language. It says the shape of the world has changed faster than our words for it. Law will learn new adjectives later. For now, men learn new shortcuts. The church feels the unfastening in 2 opposite ways at once. In the nave, alms baskets grow heavier. Grief empties pockets. In the refectory, the lay brothers scrape bowls cleaner. Donations vanish with donors. A prior writes to a patron that the monastery's poorhouse holds twice the number, and that the infirmary lacks hands to tend the sores and change the straw. The patron's scribe answers that his lord's tenants flee and rents have fallen, and that his lady is in childbed and prayers are requested. The prior reads the letter twice, hears yes and no layered together, and tells the cellarer to water the ale. Authority responds with paper. Officials declare maximum prices for shoes, caps, loaves. Sheriffs are told to arrest men who won't work at the accustomed wage. The proclamations are nailed to doors already layered with announcements for lost dogs, vespers, and a new saint's day. Men read them and shrug in the same motion. The sheriff needs labor to harvest his own domain. He will enforce the law after the cart comes home. In time, a few men will be whipped, a few masters fined, and everyone will try to forget the faces involved. But the deeper enforcement, the one that would turn the clock back, never arrives. Time does not obey. Some lords learn to count differently. A hillside once valueless because you can't push a plough over it becomes valuable because sheep can pull a profit from scrub. Fewer shepherds mean more wool per hand, exportable, coinable. A bailiff, who used to recite sowing dates and measures of rye, learns to recite weights of fleece and dye costs. He does not say the word enclosure, but he looks at hedges with interest. A woman who gathered peat for fuel finds the path blocked and learns a new map the hard way. Every change of labor is also a change of rights, and rights are just work frozen into habit. Death leaves gaps and then patterns. A village with 2 smiths loses one and becomes known for the survivor's skill. Distant carts angle through it now and then. A town that depended on a single annual fair begins to host 2 smaller markets, because small is less likely to fail. A city that prided itself on guild purity permits foreign masters to open shops because otherwise shoes go unmade. Purity becomes a luxury good. People still want it. People want bread more. There is also the economy of grief. Wills release bequests that commission candles, masses, memorial stones, painted panels. Workshops that lost men gain orders. The work of death keeps the living employed. The paradox is ugly, but it pays. A carver teaches a girl to gild because gilding is steady pay. A painter hires a widow to grind pigments because she needs a wage and he needs steady hands. If you ask them whether they profit by plague, they will tell you they profit by skill. Both can be true. Listen to a conversation in a tavern at the edge of town, where men who worked in the same field last year drink at different tables because their purses weigh different. A labourer with a new coat boasts that he refused a master who wouldn't feed him meat. An older man warns him that pride eats faster than hunger does. A woman pouring ale says the word tomorrow, like a coin that keeps its shine. The landlord counts cups and thinks about raising the price by a sliver. So small, no one will say it aloud. The fire spits resin. Someone laughs. Someone coughs and swears it's the smoke. The cough decides to be nothing until it can no longer pretend. What, finally, is a life worth? Ask the man who hires a ditcher for twice last year's rate and knows his embankment will hold because of that coin. Ask the widow who sells a ring to buy a winter's bread, because bread keeps children alive and rings do not. Ask the boy who agrees to work for less than a man's wage if the master will teach him the trick with the quenching oil that keeps steel from cracking. They will not answer in philosophy. They will answer in days. A day of bread, a day of warmth, a day without fear. A life is the sum of days you buy back from danger. By the end of the season, the fatigue feels structural. Everyone is tired of arguing about what used to be owed. Everyone is tired of pretending that the calendar still tells you what to do. A yearbook of the town would show thinner weddings, shorter funerals, thicker purses for some, thinner for others, and 1,000 tiny signatures of improvisation. If the Middle Ages were a long bargain about land and loyalty, who works, who protects, who prays, the plague tore the parchment and men rewrote the clauses with whatever ink they had. When the harvest finally comes in, imperfect and late, there is a moment of quiet relief that feels like superstition cured. The barns fill enough to call it food. The lord who insisted on custom counts sacks instead of ghosts. The steward who tried to be iron learns to be water. The young man who asked for 3 pennies gets them from another farm and does not come back to brag. The guilds write new bylaws with old words and hope the words learn their new jobs. And under all of it, the unfastening continues, not as riot, but as drift. Duties become rents, oaths become prices, places become options. When winter draws its line across the hills and smoke settles low, the gaps in households show like missing teeth. The manor court meets and finds no one to fine for letting a pig wander, because the pig wandered into a ditch, because the ditcher went to the next parish for better pay, because the steward delayed hiring him to make a point about obedience and learned a point about scarcity instead. Every absence explains another. We'll walk the empty holdings and the houses with their doors swinging. We'll meet lords without tenants and tenants without lords, and watch the scaffolding come down on both sides. Chapter 4. Lords without tenants, tenants without lords. Mourning on the manor used to begin with the same verbs: drive, yoke, call, count. Now it begins with inventory. The steward walks past fields that know their work, and men who do not arrive to do it. He keeps the old tally stick because it comforts him. Notches for plough days, cart days, boon days. But when he runs his thumb along the cuts, they feel like scars from a body the manor no longer has. The domain lies ribbed with last year's furrows, half a prayer waiting for breath. At the first croft the door bangs in the wind. Inside, a bench, a cracked jug, a child's shoe, a hole in the thatch where stars came through on the last night anyone slept here. The strip fields around it are clean of weeds because death is thorough. The steward scratches deserted in his book and writes a name after it out of habit, someone to blame or to reclaim, and stops, pen hovering. There is no one to fine. The law loves a culprit. Plague leaves a silence. A mile away, the Lord rides out with 2 men at arms, and a memory of how it felt when men bowed without calculation. He loved that order, the way a craftsman loves a balanced tool. He reins in at a cluster of holdings, where 3 families used to work his sheep walk. 2 cottages smoke, one is cold. The families that remain have started to share pasture without asking him. He sees the logic. It keeps the grass down and the wolves uncertain. But he also sees his authority pulled like wool into hands not his. He announces that he will regularize the arrangement at Michaelmas. The men nod with the grave attention of people who will decide later whether to treat words as weather. Old structures do not collapse everywhere at once. They slough like bark. In the court baron, the reeve calls names that answer with echoes. The jurors, men who used to relish catching neighbours in small wrongs, find themselves unwilling to summon the widow who let her cow wander, or the boy who cut switches from the Lord's hedgerow. There is a quiet amnesty bred by too much funeral bread. A fine system built to knit a village tight now pulls loose, one uncollected penny at a time. The tenants left behind acquire a new posture, half wary, half practical. A man whose brother died takes over his strip and a little more, promising a rent in coin instead of the old labour. He offers a handshake because there is no one left to witness a proper surrender and seisin. The steward takes the hand and later copies the handshake into Latin. Concessit, tenendum, redendo. He granted, to hold, rendering, turning improvisation into precedent with ink that looks older than it is. That is how law grows, not from thunder, but from tidy fictions written when no one is looking. Elsewhere, the absence flows upward. A young lord inherits 3 manors and can barely staff one. He could ride circuit, flexing what muscle remains, or he can retreat to the house with stone corners and sell timber from the others until the weather changes. He chooses the second, and in going, he creates tenants without lordship. Men and women who still owe fealty to a name that no longer arrives on a horse. The parish priest becomes the loudest voice, the miller the most permanent creditor, the alewife the most reliable counsel. Power is a chair. Whoever keeps sitting in it becomes the lord. Then there are manors that keep their lords but lose their point. Sheep make a different arithmetic possible. A hillside, once mocked by ploughmen, now reads like a ledger to a clever bailiff. Fewer hands, more wool, exportable silver. A hedge creeps where a footpath ran. Rights that had been common as weather. Glean a sheaf, cut a switch, Graze a cow after harvest. Meet a new word whispered first, then said aloud, no. A widow stands at a fresh thorn fence with a bundle of brush on her back and stares as if language had broken. The bailiff, who once counted boon days, counts posts. We must keep the sheep in, he says. She hears and you out. In villages with lord without tenants, another theatre plays, tenants without lord. A man who has worked the same strip since his shoulders found their breath finds that the court day comes and goes with no summons, no rent collector, no reminder of the old world. He does not forget. Forgetting would be a sin of convenience. He remembers and waits. After a season, he takes down the old tally of labour services from the beam where his father kept it, folds it into the saddlebag he inherited and never used, and rides to a market town to find a scribe. I will pay in coin, he says. The scribe smiles the smile of a man who knows a future when it knocks. Markets absorb or deny such futures one stall at a time. In towns where a lord's presence fades, guilds and councils thicken. Wardens extend their reach beyond craft to custom. They set hours for taverns, fees for stalls, fines for filth. The city father who signs the ordinance calls it cleanliness. The tanner who pays the new fee calls it lordship in a different hat. Neither is exactly wrong. You cannot have lords without tenants, but you can have rules without horses. Not every lord sulks toward irrelevance. Some learn to become landlords instead of commanders. They commute labour to rent, farm out their domains, fold their pride into parchment and court dates. They marry daughters to merchants, a union of parchment and coin that used to feel unequal and now feels like survival. The hall's dais looks stranger with every ledger added to its chest. A falcon perches in the corner and blinks at a future that smells less of hawks and more of wax. Inheritance, the old conveyor belt of property, jolts and throws sparks. Heirs die out of order. Minors inherit what cannot feed them. Guardians abuse the pause. Widows' thirds become whole houses because there is no one to contest. Cousins twice out of sight ride in to claim with cousins' names no one recalls. The court of the Lord, when it sits, becomes a theatre of genealogies acted by thin men. Sometimes a woman stands and names everyone in the room and wins, because memory has become a kind of title when ink fails. Look also at the monasteries, which are lords of another sort. Their tenants line up with the same petitions, the same tired hats in their hands. Convert dues to rent, allow subletting. Let us consolidate strips so we can plough without turning like a crab. Some abbots, trained to count souls not sacks, stumble. Others, trained to run estates, adapt. A canny cellarer leases out land for long terms at fixed rents that look low today and high tomorrow. He will later be blamed for undermining the old order, or praised for saving the house. It will depend on who writes the chronicle. In borderlands and highlands, lordship was always thinner, more promise than practice. The plague erodes even the promise. Men who once sent hawks as tribute or drove cattle along, agreed paths stop sending, stop asking. They become their own lords with neighbours as juries. This is called banditry by those who lose from it, liberty by those who gain. A sheriff rides out with papers and comes back with stories. Paper does not hold hills. Meanwhile, the churchyard teaches counts no steward wants to make. A lord who used to judge men by the stirrup now judges them by the row in which they lie. Tenants who would have died in debt die in credit because there was no one to collect. A priest who stands at so many graves learns to speak shorter homilies about longer patience. In such weather, oaths thaw. The bond between lord and man, forged once in fear of other men, frays in fear of a smaller enemy. When protection fails, obedience is renegotiated. There is a day, always one day, when a lord discovers he cannot fill a jury of 12. He can compel, he can bribe, he can appoint strangers, none of which produce what the court was for, the village telling itself its rules. He adjourns. The tenants leave politely and go back to work for wages set in the lane. Authority is not a kind of thunder. It is a habit. The habit has been broken by coughs and carts. And yet, nostalgia will try to reassemble the scaffolding. Statutes will thunder against idleness. Lords will dress their letters in Latin and indignation. Sheriffs will make examples. A few men will be paraded and whipped for excessive wage-taking. A few women for brewing without license. A few carters for refusing forced service. The spectacle satisfies the part of the world that believes fear is glue. It is not. Glue needs surfaces that still meet. The new order does not announce itself. It accretes. A tenant signs a lease where his grandfather stood for boon work. A lord sells woodland to a merchant who wants charcoal for iron. A village moves its green because the old one is closer to the new road. A hedge grows thicker. A path grows pale. People stop saying, after the pestilence, and start saying, as we do now. If you want a map of this change, don't look for borders. Look for absences that became arrangements. Bells that toll less for summons and more for funerals. Courts that meet fewer times and write longer leases. Hearths that shift from service to hire. The Middle Ages learned, painfully, that lordship is a contract, not weather. When enough signatures vanish, the script must change. Tomorrow we'll follow that script to the edge of the city and its gates, where ropes become laws, laws become habits, and the habit of watching bodies becomes a kind of state. Borders, we'll discover, weren't just lines on water. They were inventions with ink and fear behind them. Chapter 5. Borders invented. Quarantine, health passes, and the birth of control. Gates were once for taxes and enemies. After the plague, they learned new verbs. Measure, question, refuse. Ropes became laws. A guard who used to weigh sacks now weighs breath. He asks where you slept, who you touched, what the wind was like in the last town. If your answers sound like trouble, he ties a knot at your sleeve. Permission delayed, life on hold. Cities begin by improvising. A rope across a pier, a bell for no landing today, a house by the river set apart for the sick, stocked with vinegar and rules. Then the improvisations accumulate into something with a name, quarantina, the 40 days a ship waits at anchor because time itself is medicine. Other towns call it 30, or until next market day, or while the wind is wrong. Numbers matter less than the invention. Illness can be governed by distance and days. Harbours learn the choreography first. A ship appears, the wind shifts, flags tell stories. Yellow means suspicion. Clean flags mean faith, not fact. A skiff rows out with men in sashes who ask about ports, deaths, rats, never rats, because no one asks what no one sees. If the story smells honest, the ship moors at the mole. If not, it drifts in a limbo marked by buoys and curses. On shore, an officer writes detained in a ledger that makes water into a wall. Soon there are places made only for waiting. Lazarettos, long buildings with rooms like ruled paper, courtyards like cages, doors that can be barred from either side, islands by choice if the geography allows. If not, peninsulas of policy, walled compounds at the edge of town where goods are unpacked, aired, smoked over herbs, and repacked by men who sleep away from their families for the privilege of being feared. Bales hang on poles like penitent sinners. Straw is burned with the piety of an offering. A clerk counts days with a nail nicked along a post. When the nicking stops, the gate opens. Entry to a town acquires paperwork to match its stones. A man on foot presents not only his face but a letter, clean bill, health pass, testimonial, stamped by a place that swears it was well when he left. The letter lies often, not always. It says more about friendship than fever. But officials love paper the way masons love plumb lines. It turns judgment into something that feels vertical. No paper, says the gatekeeper. Then wait, or go around. Roads thicken where permits are easy, thin where zeal is high. Geography shifts on ink. Inside, movement narrows. Markets are split by ropes into fresh and suspect. A baker is told to sell at the door and to touch the coin with vinegar before he counts it. A midwife receives a pass to cross wards after curfew because birth ignores ordinances. She wears it at her belt like a soldier's token. A beggar learns to display a wooden disc stamped by the parish. License poverty, sanitized by recognition. The city watches bodies the way it watches walls. Boundaries multiply within walls as well. Pest houses collect the visibly ill. Healthy houses are sealed until either everyone recovers or the bell for the cart is rung. A mark appears on lintels, chalk cross, smeared brush, a color you can't mistake at a distance. Neighbors leave food at the threshold. The door opens a handbreadth. Eyes meet briefly over the gap. Coins clink in a bowl of vinegar. Charity becomes a corridor. Officials learn to love lists. They count the dead by parish and write the numbers on broadsheets nailed where everyone can read fear in columns. Mortality becomes public information. The city that prints the list calls it transparency. The woman who reads it calls it weather. She looks for her street the way farmers look for cloud. If the numbers fall, shutters open. If they rise, markets thin themselves. People enforce their own cordon by staying home. Borders need enforcers, and enforcers need stories to live with what they do. Watchmen invent rituals. 2 steps back when a window opens, a washed rag over the mouth, a prayer said twice between questions. They accept bribes because pay is late and fear is constant, and a bribe looks like gratitude in hard times. A rich man's cart rolls through after sunset. A poor woman is turned away at noon. The rope is not blind. It sees purse strings. Power colonizes the new habits. Councils discover that health is a wide word. Under its banner, they set hours, close theatres, limit burials, reroute traffic, license inns, number houses. What began as a rope across a plank becomes a net under the city. Some of this saves lives, some saves reputations. All increases the reach of those with seals. You can hear the philosophy harden in the orders. Private liberty yields to public good. The phrase tastes of necessity and chance in equal measure. The church bends with the wind and against it. Processions pause or shrink. Holy water is removed from fonts and appears in bottles. Pilgrimages are discouraged with indulgences for staying home. Relics are aired with discretion. Saints do not like to be treated as medicines, but people do. In some places, clerics patrol with the watch. In others, they warn councils not to make fear a sacrament. There are sermons for and against ropes. Sometimes it comes down to a priest and an officer at a bedside, one with oil and one with ordnance, and a family that wants both. Trade adapts with a resentment that sounds like prayer. May the Lord shorten the waiting days, says the merchant, and then learns to price them into the contract. Warehouses grow special rooms for airing. Coopers drill extra holes. Sailors sleep on shore in sheds where they can see the water but not the tavern. An entire class of men appears whose job is to handle suspect goods. They become intimate with smoke and rules and are shunned on feast days. When they marry, it is often among themselves. Borders create castes. There are clevernesses. Cities share signals so a ship need not invent a reputation at each port. A booklet of passes becomes a man's second face. Known healthy is a commodity. A town sets up a roadside oven where letters can be smoked before being delivered. The post acquires a scent of rosemary. A physician writes a guide recommending quarantine for ideas, avoidance of bad theories with the same zeal as bad air. He is ignored, then imitated, then claimed as obvious wisdom. And of course there is theatre. A cordon of men with halberds around a village looks like protection to those inside and siege to those out. Border stones are painted. Watch huts sprout pennants. The city wants its safety to be seen. This has a cost. Outsiders read the show as insult. Trade moves to friendlier harbours. A town grows proud of its strictness and poorer by it. Another grows lax and rich, until it learns why the strict grew strict. Does it work? Sometimes, obviously. A ship sick at anchor is a ship not tied to the quay. A pest house concentrates hazard, which allows the rest to breathe. The first weeks of any outbreak are a fight against speed. Borders slow, and slowness is a medicine older than prayer. But the system knows failure intimately. Bribes are borders' rats. Sympathy is a smuggler. Hunger walks around ropes by the road through the marsh. What cannot be denied is what borders make beyond disease. A habit of counting and permitting. A sense that movement is a privilege assignable from above. Health becomes a jurisdiction. Officials learn to say, "Show me," and to be obeyed. Even when the plague ebbs, the scaffolding remains. People find it useful for other fears, vagabonds, heresy, rumour. The state, which used to be a wall and a gallows, becomes also a ledger and a passbook. By the time the city breathes again, its gates are older than its stones. The guards' questions have become catechism. The clerk's lists, calendar. The lazaret, a landmark schoolboys point to from boats. The people who lived through it know these things were born of panic and kept for convenience. They will say they prefer inconvenience to graves. The truth sits between, like a rope slackening after a storm. Next we step from gates to gowns, from guards to leeches, medicine's public failure, private improvisation, and the long night where relics and recipes competed for authority. When borders make time, knowledge must learn how to use it. And that, in our story, is where things truly break. Chapter 6. When medicine broke. Doctors, relics, and the failure of knowing. The new ropes bought cities time. Medicine was supposed to spend it wisely. Instead, the hourglass turned and turned, and knowledge slid through the neck like sand that didn't know where to settle. Begin at the university, where certainty wears a blue robe. In a panelled hall, masters dispute with the calm of men who combine the world in Latin. Causes efficient, material, formal, final. The air is tidy, the streets outside are not. A student copies sentences about corrupted airs arising from southern winds and marsh exhalations. He underlines a passage about the heavens, how a conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in the watery signs had heated and poisoned the lower elements. He closes his book with relief. Cosmic explanations feel cleaner than rats. In the infirmary that depends on his faculty, a woman gasps and clutches the swell in her armpit, as if it were a foreign child. The doctor delays seeing her until he has chosen a day with the right star. Galen and Hippocrates are still the fathers. Humours still govern bodies the way seasons govern fields. Blood, hot and wet. Collar hot and dry. Phlegm cold and wet. melancholy, cold and dry. The mathematics of balance suggests practical verbs: bleed, purge, sweat. You can do them with tools at hand, so they bleed. The physician sets a basin under an elbow and watches good colour leave with good intentions. When the fever softens for an hour, both he and the family feel righteous. When it returns, he prescribes a stronger purge, a diet sharper in opposites. Cool the hot, dry the wet, sweeten the bitter. If the patient dies, the logic survives. The corruption was too deep, or the hour unpropitious. The family nods because grief can't afford a quarrel with the only man who might help the next child. Under the same roof, a barber surgeon sharpens a knife and bites a strip of leather to test it. He has less Greek and more scars. He lances swellings, washes hands in vinegar, ties off veins with a steadiness that looks like compassion from the next room. He talks to bodies, not theories. In one alley, he is a saviour. In another, a butcher who draws the illness out, only because it was coming out anyway. He knows the smell of a bubo that will not close, the sound the skin makes when it splits and the household gasps. He does not promise. He charges less than a physician, and sometimes more, depending on how dark the day has been. Astrologers find a kind of overtime. Calendars fill with advice. When to open a vein under Mars in the right house? Which hour is safest for a journey? Why this summer's winds bear southern malice? They are mocked at dinner and visited at dawn. A city council orders prayers for better stars and then hires men to fumigate sewers. In the ledger of cures, incense and pitch share a page because both produce smoke that makes the air feel different. Feeling different is step one to believing you are safer. Relics travel, so do people. A rib of a saint arrives with witnesses and a chest. The chest arrives with a list of miracles in other towns. Lines form. The faithful touch wood and bone through silk, because silk is a reverent barrier. Some coughs quiet in the press. Hope is a real medicine for an hour. Others worsen. Relics do not publish their failures. Pilgrimage shrinks from months to circuits inside a city. Walk to 3 churches, give alms at each. Tie a ribbon at the 4th, and promise another if the fever lifts. The algebra of vows rearranges fear into manageable sums. Household medicine goes wide as a river in flood. Still rooms turn to laboratories. Rosemary hung thick as rafters, juniper berries bruised under spoons, vinegar simmered with lavender, sage, rue. Windows are white with the crust of boiled wine. Women who were always doctors to their own now become doctors to the lane. Recipes leap from mouth to mouth like rumours. Recipes are rumours with measurements. A slice of onion on the saw. Change it when it stinks. Bread poultices draw the poison. Figs with yeast. Leeches if the colour is too strong. Each cure is a story. Each story claims a cousin who lived. Charms never left. Now they speak louder. Peppercorns threaded on red string. An amulet stamped with a line of Psalm 91. A badge from a holy well that drips in spring, and this year in summer too. Surely that means something. A mother hangs a sprig of rue above the cradle and calls it smell against miasma, prayer against terror. The line between medicine and magic was always chalk. Fear rubs it with a sleeve. And then there are the men who smell opportunity. Peddlers of universal water with enough alcohol to make despair sleep. Sellers of theriac, real and counterfeit, heavy with opium when the purse is heavy, flavoured with anise when it is not. A fellow with a cart of oranges claims they cleanse the air if pinned to doors with iron nails. A blacksmith cheers and sells the nails. A monk with a bottle of vinegar of the 4 thieves recounts a tale about robbers who walked among the dying untouched, because of what they rubbed on their skin. The tale is doubted and bought anyway. Skepticism is cheaper than a grave only if you count coin. When knowledge fails publicly, authority becomes theatre. A faculty issues a concilium, explaining the plague in language neat enough to frame. The council posts it on the cathedral door. The text blames corrupt heirs and prescribes clean lives. Avoid baths, they open pores. Avoid sadness, it opens the heart. Avoid crowds, they open everything. Citizens obey each part they can afford. Baths close, wine flows. A few men purchase solitude, many cannot. In a courtyard, a mother reads the advice about avoiding immoderate emotion and laughs with a sound that would have saved her if laughter cured. Yet not everything is blindness. Some cities strike lucky habits. They burn bedding, air clothes, tell mourners to step back from the cart. A physician notes that those who handle straw from ships sicken more. Another sees that the sick cluster along rat paths. They cannot see the flea, they can see the pattern. Pattern is a kind of lamp. It burns too low for comfort and bright enough to annoy the university. Meanwhile, funerals learn to be fast. The priest shortens rites to spare breath and time. The living want both. He brings oil and an ordinance. No wakes, no keening, no candles near the bed. He is obeyed in pieces. A family closes the shutters and sings anyway. They cannot believe light is an enemy when all enemies are dark. The failure is not only in cures, it is in trust. Doctors become men who arrive after certainty has left. Priests become men who choose rules over tears. Officials become men who measure distance like charity. When the third child in a lane dies after a physician's visit, his fee looks like theft, even if he did nothing but try. When a relic fails, its custodian says the saint was insulted by unbelief. When a charm fails, its seller says the knot was tied wrong. Blame is a vaccine against despair. You inject it into whoever is near. And so knowledge breaks where society breaks, at the seam between we and they. The poor say the rich have a medicine they won't share. The rich say the poor are careless and poison wells with their habits. Foreigners are the easiest explanation. They arrive by ship with coughing gods. Jews become targets, then victims, as rumor adds unreason to arithmetic. Midwives become suspects because knowledge in women frightens men who have run out of their own. By the end of the season, the catalogue of remedies reads like a poem in a cracked mirror. Smoke the air, sweeten it, sharpen it, avoid it. Bleed the arm, drain the swelling, poultice the groin. Do not touch. Pray for rain, pray for wind, pray for a silence in the bells. Some things helped, many did not. What remained was the knowledge that the old explanations, if not lies, were at least insufficient. The world had shifted weight. The books stayed on their shelves. Borders slowed, medicine searched, households improvised, charlatans thrived, saints travelled. The plague kept its own counsel. Out of that mismatch came a more dangerous sickness, the appetite for culprits. If the body could not be cured, the city could at least be purified. Tomorrow, we walk into the square where trust snaps, where rumors choose targets, and the politics of panic makes enemies out of neighbors. Chapter 7. Trust collapses, scapegoats, pogroms, and the politics of panic. When cures fail, cities treat blame as a medicine. It is fast, it is strong, and it is addictive. The recipe is simple. Take a fear with no edges. Pour it into a vessel with a name. It begins small, with a story that travels faster than carts. Someone swears he saw a stranger sprinkle powder on a well cover at dawn. Someone else swears she heard a beggar mutter a curse after being refused bread. By noon the powder is lime. By vespers it is poison. By midnight it is a conspiracy. Powder, in truth, makes water cleaner. Rumour makes it fatal. The well is roped off. The roper feels brave. Officials fight two fires, bodies and stories. They post a notice, no man shall speak of poisoned wells, and in posting it, make the phrase bloom. The sheriff questions the stranger and learns he is not a stranger. He is a tinker who follows fares and sleeps in barns with permission older than the sheriff's post. The sheriff lets him go and is cursed by both sides for weakness and tyranny at once. He goes home and washes his hands because it feels like doing something that works. In the lanes, old categories sharpen into targets. Foreigners first, men whose bread is spiced differently and whose saints' names rhyme wrong. Beggars next, poverty itself becomes suspicious now that charity is rationed. Then lepers, because fear and skin have always been neighbours. Then Jews, because they are already a story ready to be told. Moneylenders in the ledger, separate graves, prayers in another tongue, and a memory of debts a plague-sick world would like to burn with bodies. The machinery of accusation is older than the plague and runs beautifully when oiled with panic. An infant dies after sucking at his mother's breast with a fever. A neighbour remembers a quarrel with a man who keeps the Sabbath. The rumour acquires a name and then a confession. Confessions arrive on time when the rack keeps time. A man admits to throwing bags of poison into rivers. He names a list of accomplices that reads like a map of where he has begged for mercy in his life. The list is copied neatly. Neatness makes lies official. Not all councils want blood. Some know that markets die when neighbours do. They issue protections, station guards at Jewish quarters, escort men to and from work with halberds that face outward. But guards are also theatre, and theatre draws crowds, and crowds invent their own scripts. A thrown stone makes an argument no statute can match for clarity. One night becomes many. Synagogues burn clean because the timber's seasoned for a century. Flames make a fine clarity of everything. Afterwards, a warden writes into the town book how many houses are now vacant, and to whom the rents will fall. Even mercy keeps accounts. Flagellant companies enter like answers with their own drums. Bare backs, iron-tipped cords, a procession of penance that claims to soak the city's sin into their skin. They are spectacle and sermon in one. For a week, order bends around them. Shops shut, women weep. Boys beat their chests hard enough to bruise. The companies denounce priests for comfort and Jews for calamity. They demand that the city choose between visible penance and hidden poisoners. After they leave, the city is not cured, but it is raw. Rawness makes scapegoats stick. Household knowledge turns suspicious when held by the wrong hands. Midwives, those calm faces in night doorways, are accused of knowing how to make fevers sleep, which is near enough to knowing how to make babies die for men who have lost too much to nuance. Apothecaries who sell theriac by the spoon are asked whether they also sell its opposite by the grain. Their scales become symbols of betrayal. Gravediggers who handle corpses for a living are told they carry death in their clothes and then beaten when they come for a drink after work. The city cannot afford to hate them and does so anyway. Pogroms are logistics pretending to be rage. Look at the parts. Doors marked the night before. Barrels rolled to make barricades. Men with clubs who somehow have time to bind their wrists with cloth against splinters. Women pull children inside. Some neighbours hide families in cellars. Others point to the cellars when the crowd asks. Mercy hangs on the smallest hinges. A man who delays a knock. A woman who doesn't hear. A boy who drops a key in straw and cannot find it. Later, the same people will stand together at market as if bread were stronger than memory. Bread is strong, memory is patient. The council keeps minutes that sound like penance for paper, resolved that no further violences occur, resolved that all strangers declare themselves before noon, resolved that informers receive a small gratuity for service to the common health. Informers are never small for long. A thin purse thickens quickly when fear has a price. A woman whose husband died last month learns she can buy peace by denouncing a neighbor. She hates herself efficiently. Sometimes the church holds the line, sometimes it draws it. One bishop threatens interdict for cities that shed blood on rumor. Another composes a prayer that names those who corrupt the waters without naming who the waters have always belonged to. Parish priests stand in pulpits trying to say, "This is weather, not a plot," and hear themselves sound like men who have chosen the wind over their own. In another parish, a friar carries a rumor like a torch, lighting faces until faces are all anyone can see. There are places where protection works. A lord declares his Jews men of my chamber with a tone that turns mercy into property. It saves lives, and the saved remember the grammar as well as the grace. A city locks its gates against its own temper and feeds the poor for a week, and the rumor decays from lack of air. A physician writes that plague is a common enemy and is stoned on his way home by men who cannot afford common enemies. To them, only enemies with addresses matter. The habit of blame prints itself into rule. Curfews for suspicious persons, bans on gatherings, save for processions duly licensed, searches of homes for herbs, not consistent with honest cookery, lists of surnames known to be troublesome. The troublesome share one trade, one street, one faith. A law that began as a health rope becomes a noose for anyone who seems like a knot. When the fever falls, some rules stay. They have learned new uses, and then, almost abruptly, the numbers fall. No one knows why. Epidemics end with the same mystery they arrive. The mob looks around at the wreckage it made and calls it necessary, then regrettable, then past. Houses are claimed, debts are erased along with debtors, and a city retunes itself to commerce. We had to survive, men say, and count coins that once had other owners' heat in them. What remains is not only graves, but the new muscle of government, a talent for drawing lines, for licensing movement, for printing lists with consequences. The same men who failed to cure discovered they could count, and counting made a kind of order that paid. Tomorrow we tally what survived and why, how tax rolls, tithes, and inventories turned mourning into management, and how the state learned to know the living by learning to bury the dead. Chapter 8. Counting the dead, counting the living. Tax, tithes, and the new state. After the season of bells comes the season of lists. Grief makes people talk. Government makes them count. The city that could not name a cure learns to name its losses, line by line, as if arithmetic could stitch skin. Begin where the ink first thickens, the parish. The clerk who once copied feast days now copies endings. On the eve of St. Lawrence, on the octave of Michael, on a Thursday of foul air. He is not keeping history, he is keeping order. Graves must be assigned, plots numbered, stipends collected for masses said quickly and often. Beside the names of the dead he marks who paid for candles, who owed a mortuary fee, who asked for an anniversary service next year, if God allows years. The margin turns practical. Husbandman, 2 beasts remaining. Widow, no tithe this quarter. Orphans, placed with the sacristan's sister. Charity is an index. The manner learns soon after. Bailiffs unroll rolls that used to read like recipes for labour. So many ploughings, so many harrowings, and find themselves writing inventories instead. Held 2 yard lands by custom, heir under age, land lies idle, heriot due, best cow taken. A heriot, the lord's right to the best beast at a tenant's death, arrives like a ritual everyone pretends is ancient mercy. It is also revenue, and revenue is the new language of survival. Where there is no beast, the margin says remitted, postponed, or the truth in one word, none. To tax the living, you must first prove they exist. So cities and lords invent new musters of presence. Town lists of fires, hearths, become lists of men who owe watch duty, then lists of men who can be fined for failing to show, then lists of taxable households. In the countryside, reeves compile estents of holdings consolidated by death. A man now cultivates 3 strips where his father cultivated 1, and the reeve writes it as both accomplishment and opportunity. Rents are adjusted to an age that prefers coin to days. Councils, learning the comfort of columns, post weekly bills of mortality in public places. They are crude at first. This parish, 19. That parish, 12. Unknown, many. People read the numbers as if they were weather vanes. Merchants time convoys to falling totals. Brides are promised after the next good week. When the figures rise, shutters thicken. When they fall, the hawkers reappear with voices that sound like relief priced by the hour. What looks like compassion on the wall is calculation in the chamber. Tithes drop when the harvest shrinks and households vanish. A bishop writes to his chapters, "Assess in corn where coin fails. Forgive in part to keep in whole." Some parishes commute tithes to fixed sums to stop the bleeding. Others insist on in-kind and find themselves storing more grain than souls. From those storerooms grow the first parish granaries with locks and tallies and men who like keys too much. Administration is the church's new sacrament. For lords and cities alike, death makes property liquid. When a house empties, someone must say where its table, its pots, its tools, its chest of rough linen go. Enter the notary with his sandshaker and his conscience that charges by the page. He witnesses wills that read like maps of grief turned into bequests. To the altar of Saint Sebastian, to the poor of the parish, to my sister, to my posthumous child if God grants it. He inventories goods shelf by shelf because value is how the living prove the dead have been honored. The inventory teaches authorities what a household is worth, not in love, but in coin. Once learned, that lesson is never forgotten. The new state, it does not yet call itself that, discovers a talent for asking. A city needs money for guards, lazarettos, road repairs, grain subsidies when markets break. It levies a gift and writes down who gives. Gifts become aids. Aids become subsidies. Subsidies become habit. In some communes, the list grows so precise. Household heads, ages, trades, debts, that they look like portraits. Officials call it fairness. Scribes call it work. The listed call it a mirror they cannot avoid. In the courts, the rope of custom is spliced to the chain of cash. Reliefs paid by heirs, amercements for late suits, fines to license marriage outside the Lord's domain. All are tallied with an eagerness sharpened by empty halls. Where once a Lord steward prized obedience, he now prizes liquidity. Take rent, he writes to his under-bailiffs, and leave the men their days. 10 years later, no one remembers how the days used to sound. Counting the dead has other uses. It becomes political speech. A council that managed to keep its mortality low posts the proof and shames its rival city upriver. We held firm, the broadsheet says between lines. Traders steer accordingly. A monastery proud of its survival publishes the names of brothers lost and saved, grouped by obedience, as if discipline itself cured. Donors like the look of order. Endowments follow order like bees' cold honey. Alongside taxes, there is the tithe in reverse, relief funds. Alms are tallied with the same seriousness as dues. Boxes are sealed with 3 keys, so no single man can be tempted past providence. Lists of recipients are read aloud to prove the right poor are being fed. The wrong poor, those who arrive from outside parishes, those with idle hands, those with accents that make fear easy, are entered on a different page. Exclusion learns to wear the face of stewardship. A new profession thickens at the edge of all this writing. Measurers of value. Appraisers for probate, sworn men who can say what a cow is worth in a thin winter, and what a carpenter's tools would fetch if sold to his rival. Their language is exact the way a knife is exact. 1 bed with sacking, coarse. 1 chest, lock broken. 1 pan, cracked. 2 spoons, horn. 1 psalter without clasp. 3 shirts, worn. Out of such sentences grows a sense that a life can be translated into things and things into sums. It is obscene and necessary at once. With measurement comes standardization. If you are to tax a town's fires, you must decide what a hearth is. If you are to value land, you must mark its edges. So stones appear, and ditches are straightened, and maps are sketched that pretend fields are rectangles. A commune surveys its quarter and discovers that argument is shorter when lines are longer. The map remains after the plague ends, and future quarrels start with, as shown. Not all counting is cold. The same lists that find coin also find children alone. Parishes bind orphans to households and record the terms. A girl will serve for clothing and bread until marriage. A boy will learn a trade for 7 years with a promise of tools. It is governance at its most intimate and its most officious. Love outsourced to a ledger. Yet some thrive. A dyer's foundling becomes his partner. A miller's orphan learns to keep accounts better than the miller did. Statistics make exceptions possible. The habit of the ledger outlives the fever. Even in good years, councils ask for numbers because numbers defended them in bad ones. The watch is paid from a roll. Street repairs are assigned by ward. Grain is bought against dear times and issued by ticket when dear times come. Authorities who once knew themselves by sword and seal now know themselves by list and lock. The state begins to look less like a tower and more like a cupboard with many labelled drawers. Of course, resentment learns to read. Men scowl at the tally stick the way they once scowled at spears. When did they learn so much about us? Someone asks at a tavern, and someone else answers, when we ask them to bury our dead. The answer is unfair and true. Control came as a byproduct of care. Once learned, it was too useful to lose. By the close of our ledger chapter, 2 economies stand side by side. The economy of survival, grain, wages, rent, and the economy of remembrance, masses, candles, stones, painted saints with names on ribbons. Counting serves both. Tomorrow we walk into the workshops where mourning becomes craft and coin, where carvers, painters, and bell founders turn loss into objects, and where a society that measured its dead begins to purchase its memory. Chapter 9. Business of death, art, ritual, and the market for memory. When lists become habit, grief learns to shop. Counting the dead teaches the living what remembrance costs, and a craft world wakes to meet demand. Workshops that staggered in bad harvest now hum to the beat of morning. Mallets on stone, brushes on gesso. bells cooling in moulds that smell like earth and thunder. Start at the mason's yard. Effigies, once the privilege of a few, multiply. Not all are knights asleep with dogs at their feet. New patrons arrive with ledgers instead of lances, widows of wool men, aldermen with ink-stained fingers, a midwife whose children insist she must lie like a lady because she kept them alive. The mason offers tears, plain slab with incised cross, half figure with folded hands, full recumbent with pillow and a book. Saints in niches for those who can pay for intercession carved into the air. A cheaper fashion appears beside the effigy. The transy, a shrouded corpse with ribs showing. I was what you are, you will be what I am. Fear given form, and form given a price. In the painter's shop, saints learn new jobs. Saint Sebastian and Saint Roche, arrows and saws, become bestsellers, flanking donors who kneel smaller than their own prayers. Panels travel from guild to chapel and back again. A cooper's wall shows Saint Roch lifting his tunic with a look that says, "Yes, I know," while the guild's dead are listed in gold below. The painter's apprentice mixes black with bone ash for a depth the master swears cannot be faked. It eats light like sorrow, he says, and the client nods as if grief could be matched by pigment weight. Bells keep time and sell it. Founders cast with fresh confidence. The city that rang itself hoarse now orders tones for consolation and warning. Inscriptions lengthen. I speak for the living. I cry for the dead. I break the storm. Each claim adds coin. Parishioners contribute by list. The widow gave a spoon, the smith a bar of iron, the children a handful of nails, and the founder melts offerings into a common metal that will teach the parish to feel together. When the bell first sounds, men look at each other the way men look after surviving a bridge. Undertaking, not yet a profession by name, becomes a network of rented objects. Drapers keep stores of black cloth and palls. Carpenters maintain biers with wheels greased for sudden work. Candle makers offer hearse structures, wooden trees bristling with sockets, for vigils that turn night into honeyed day. Confraternities of burial men organize under banners and statutes. Who carries, who digs, who prays when families are too thin to fill the pew. They keep books with an elegance the city envies, names, dates, dues, the small cross that marks a man carried by men who will one day carry each other. At church doors, memory becomes subscription. Chantries, endowments for perpetual masses, multiply. Some are modest. A mason leaves coin for one mass on his death day each year, wine for the priest, bread for 6 poor men. Others build stone annexes where a hired priest says daily prayers beside a window that looks onto the street. The donor wanted passers-by to see salvation at work the way they see a mill wheel. The theology is plain arithmetic. Prayers speed souls. Money buys prayers. Therefore, money speeds souls. Critics frown. Donors leave instructions anyway. The poor receive alms attached to these gifts. On the vigil of my death, 12 shoes to the bare foot. A shoemaker nods. Death keeps shops open. Cemetery walls turn to pages. The dance macabre unrolls across charnel houses. A king, a queen, a bishop, a mason, a child, each led by a capering skeleton with an expression halfway between joke and law. The painter, paid by the wardens, works fast between rains and uses red like a bell. People read the wall the way they read bills of mortality, except this list rhymes. Children memorize couplets that promise equality later. Parents add lines about behaving now. A morality that once spoke from pulpits learns to speak from plaster, and plaster is a good evangelist. It is where everyone already stands. Bones become architecture. Ossuaries, stacked under cloisters, allow ground to be used twice, once for crying, once for sorting. Skull, femur, rib, a grammar of what remains. In towns where land is tight, bone rooms acquire painted borders and small lamps. A woman leaves a coin for light among the bones in her will, and sleeps better while living. Visitors descend stairs and find themselves calmer than they expected. Tidy finality is easier to love than fresh earth. Print, where it exists in our late story, quickens the trade in fear and comfort. Woodcut sheets of St. Roch sell beside amulets and garlic. Primers for the ars moriendi, the art of dying, offer panels of temptations and consolations. Demons whispering despair, angels countering with hope, relatives reaching for purse strings, a doctor offering a useless vial, the dying man choosing a crucifix instead. The book does not name prices, the printer does. A family keeps one by the bed and reads images when words fail. Textiles learn to speak mourning. Households tuck away lengths of black that come out like winter clothes. Tailors keep patterns for sadness that fits, making gowns that signal loss without crippling work. Widows' veils thin after the first month, so hands can see to stitch. Richer women keep thicker veils longer, a visible schedule of grief. In inventories, a gown of black becomes as common as a pot for porridge. Even lace adapts. Needleworkers produce narrow white edges for black sleeves, contrast as rhetoric. There is a market at the grave as well as for it. Vendors stand near cemetery gates with bread for alms, candles for souls, rings stamped with saints on thin gold for girls who want protection and fashion both. The wardens grumble about commerce in holy ground, and then take a fee for stall space. The poor eat because the dead are generous buyers by proxy. On the Day of the Dead, the place looks like a fair with quieter songs. If you think this commerce cheapens grief, listen to a contract being read. Item, 1 mass with a tolling like that for my father. Item, my name to be written in the bead roll. Item, 10 loaves to be given at the door to those who line in rain. Item, a panel with Our Lady and the Plague Saints, and my wife kneeling, but not proud. Pride polices itself in clauses. The parish polices pride with where the panel hangs. Near the font for the rich, near the door for the rest, in the sacristy for those whose sums were honest but small. Placement is theology in wood. Theatre returns, but now it comforts. A guild stages a pageant, where a saint defeats pestilence. A masked figure with a beaked face borrowed from rumour, and the crowd cheers at an ending they have paid to see. Children learn the cue lines and shout them through the year. The plague made fear a public art. Now art wrestles it back into story. Does the business of death corrupt? Sometimes. A painter recycles halos. A priest forgets a name. A bell founder cheats bronze with too much tin. A sexton rents out a grave twice in a busy week. But watch the other maths. A workshop feeds 3 families on chantry coin. A confraternity buries the friendless with more dignity than many cousins manage. A widow's pole is rented for a neighbour's funeral because grief is a fabric that stretches. Markets, at their best, turn private love into public bread. And because we are following endings toward beginnings, notice what this economy makes possible. Money set aside for prayers also sets aside capital. Capital learns to sit and earn. Foundations teach cities to think in years. Bureaucrats keep chantry rolls beside tax rolls. Painters standardize patterns and then innovate on the edges. A taste for clarity creeps in. Sharper letters on stones, cleaner lines in panels, names spelled the same across ledgers. Out of the commerce of memory comes a culture that likes to see what it is buying. an attitude that will travel well into other markets. Tomorrow, we close the ledger and the shrine together. We gather the threads, labour unfastened, lordship thinned, borders tightened, knowledge cracked, trust tested, counting perfected, mourning monetized, and say plainly how a disease broke an era. The Middle Ages don't end because clocks strike. They end because enough habits change at once that people wake in a world where yesterday's words buy less than they used to. The Middle Ages end here. What the plague changed forever. Stand anywhere along our path, on the quay where the plank touched stone, in the lane with a chalked cross, at a manor court where names stopped answering, under a bell that learned to speak numbers, and you can feel the hinge. Eras don't end in a single groan. They click, tooth by tooth, until the door will not close the old way. Begin with labour. The plague tore out people and left time behind. Scarcity turned hands into coin, coin into contracts, and contracts into choices. Custom ceased to be a spell when hunger learned arithmetic. Duties commuted to rent. Boyhoods detoured into wages. Movement, once a sin of restlessness, became a skill. The medieval bargain, work for protection, protection for obedience, lost the only part that could not be faked: presence. When protection failed, obedience negotiated. That negotiation is modernity, discovering its voice in a field. Lordship thinned and changed hats. The horse and the hall did not vanish. They learned to keep ledgers. A hedge around pasture spoke more clearly than a banner because it said no in wood that grew each spring. Power, once a posture, became a paper trail. Leases, surveys, lists of men who owed and could pay. Where the Lord withdrew, councils and guilds advanced, setting hours, weighing loaves, licensing stairs as if steps themselves needed permission. You could say government became nosy. You could also say it finally learned where lives were lived. Borders invented themselves out of ropes and fear, then taught cities to measure movement as if it were a taxable good. Quarantine was a theology of time, salvation by waiting, and a rehearsal for something quieter and bigger, a state that counts, stamps, and says when. Lazarettos, health passes, mortality bills, the alphabet of a bureaucracy that outlived the fever because it was useful for everything else, from grain hoarding to rumour control. Even when gates reopened, questions stayed. Who are you? Where from? Show me. The habit of permission is a long shadow. Knowledge broke, but the fracture let in a light that hated eloquence. Universities repeated the sky. Households experimented on beds. Doctors bled, midwives poulticed, charlatans diluted, saints travelled. None of this looked like progress while it failed. Yet pattern, rat paths, straw roots, the arithmetic of rooms, quietly beat prophecy. Trust in pure authority dimmed, respect for trial, note, and this worked last time brightened. Centuries later, the memory of failure would fertilize a more stubborn curiosity. The plague did not invent experiment, but it made certainty blush. Trust collapsed where fear found names. Pogroms and punishments offered a counterfeit cure. Clarity at the cost of neighbours. Those scars matter. They taught rulers that panic can be steered, and citizens that lists can wound. They also taught something sour but lasting. Safety is a story that needs characters. The later state would cast new villains, vagrants, heretics, witches, on the same stage built for poisoners of wells. If there is a warning we inherit whole, it is that appetite for culprits blooms when remedies fail. Counting the dead disciplined the living. Parish rolls, hearth lists, inventories, chantry accounts. Paper built skeletons inside institutions. It made pity legible and taxable. How many is a cruel question in a plague. It is also the midwife of planning. From those columns came granaries with locks, watches with paydays, bridges with budgets, and a taste for exactness that bled into art and trade. Letters crisper, measures agreed, maps straighter than fields. Administration, mocked as fussy, proved to be memory given handles. Grief went to market and did not shame itself. The business of death employed the living, democratized remembrance, and standardized devotion. Effigies for merchants, masses on schedule, bells with inscriptions that promised weather control and solidarity. These were not decadences so much as rehearsals for a world where meaning is commissioned and audited. Art learned to answer demand without losing honesty. The transy showed bone. The danse macabre laughed without cruelty. The panel saint met your eye like a neighbor. In making loss visible, craft taught comfort to keep time. Add these teeth of the hinge together and the gear turns. Labor mobility, paper lordship, border logic, skeptical medicine, weaponized rumor, fiscal memory, merchandised mourning. None alone ends an age. Together, they changed how Europeans answered 4 questions every society must solve. Who works? Who decides? What counts as true? What is a life worth? Before the plague, the answers were anchored in place, person and prayer. After, the answers drifted toward price, paper and proof. Work travelled. Decisions sat in councils. Truth had to survive experiment and experience. Worth was tallied in days you could buy back from risk, bread, warmth, burial, a mass with your name spelled right. You can still dislike this world. You cannot deny that it begins here. The medieval doesn't disappear, it molts. Relics still draw lines, banners still matter, vows still shape lives. But they compete with contracts that outlive faces, gates that remember you, and workshops that measure sorrow by the ell. The Middle Ages end not because faith failed or kings fell, but because habit re-specified itself. People woke into a yesterday that would no longer behave. They improvised for a season and discovered they preferred some of their inventions to the piece they replaced. There is a last image worth keeping. A bell, newly cast with bronze melted from spoons and nail gifts, rings over a market where prices have learned gravity again. A mason's apprentice, hired last week at terms his grandfather would have called insolent, pauses to listen. A widow counts change for a loaf wrapped in cloth cut from her mourning dress. A watchman checks a pass out of habit and waves a man through out of mercy. A clerk posts a thinner mortality bill and steps back so the crowd can see. A painter lifts his brush not for a plague saint, but for a scene of a family at table. Plain faces, good bread, a sprig of rue above the door because some habits are now called wisdom. If you want a date, you will be disappointed. Hinges are not anniversaries. If you want a sentence, the plague destroyed the Middle Ages by forcing Europe to survive with tools that would not fit back into their old sheath. Price in place of pledge, list in place of lord, gate in place of gesture, trial in place of tale. The door swings. When it closes again, the room has changed. Thank you for walking the whole path with me. If the episode was helpful, please like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I'm curious to see where your bells have been ringing.